Tonight, buried inside a routine contract dispute, a stack of internal campaign files, surface polling decks, strategy memos, and sworn testimony that lays out a story the Trump world never wanted you to see in full. On paper, the numbers they cited were historic, but behind closed doors and black and white, their own data teams were warning Americans were tough graders on Trump's economy. What these documents reveal changes everything about how we understand those years. We're talking official records, contemporaneous notes, emails, and statements given under oath. Before we go further, subscribe right now because what you're about to hear is not being explained clearly anywhere else, and you do not want to rely on filtered talking points. This all begins with a filing in federal court that almost no one was watching, a payment dispute between the Trump political operation and mid-tier polling firm we'll call Northbridge Analytics. In the attachments before the judge-ordered portions sealed, there were 37 separate exhibits: polling books, draft speeches, internal correspondence, photos of whiteboards from strategy sessions, even excerpts from deposition transcripts, all released as evidence. The exhibits were briefly public. Then, just as quickly, they were pulled down and re-uploaded with heavy redactions. But not before they were copied, archived, and passed along. I spent hours going through what survives, and what it shows over and over is this. Not once, not twice, repeatedly. Trump's own team knew that voters were giving his economy a lower grade than the headlines suggested. Let me start with Exhibit 12. It's a 74-page slide deck dated March 14, 2018. The title across the first slide, Economic Sentiment Tracker, Great Question. Across the top, the campaign logo. At the bottom, in small print, Prepared for DJT Committee, Confidential. On page 6, there's a simple table labeled Overall Grade for National Economy, Adults, Registered Voters, Likely Voters. The question is printed in full. Let me read this word for word. If you had to give the national economy a letter grade A, B, C, D, or F, what grade would you give it today? Next to that, in bold, are the results among likely voters. 11%, A, 38%, B, 32%, C, 32%, B, 32%, C, 13%, D, 6%, F. Read that again. In early 2018, at a time when the public message was booming economy, historic highs, best numbers ever, only about 1 in 10 likely voters was willing to give the economy an A. The most common grade was a B or C, a solid, stubborn middle. Americans were not handing out the A+ the president insisted he deserved, but it gets worse. Turn to page 12. The slide is titled Working and Middle Income Households. Great question. The A number drops to 7%. The C number jumps to 38%. And in red text, someone has added a comment box on the right-hand margin. Perception gap remains significant among 75K income's headline strength, not translating into top grades. Underneath, 3 words are underlined twice. Americans tough graders. There's no spin here. This is not a media talking point. This is internal correspondence from the president's own pollster, released as evidence in a payment dispute, spelling out the problem in plain language. Voters were not giving him the A he thought he earned. Exhibit 18 takes us inside the room. It's a scanned photo of a whiteboard from a July 2019 strategy session. The faces in the room are blurred out thick gray circles, completely erasing their identities. Names along the bottom edge are black-barred, but the writing on the board is legible. At the top, in all caps, and what is written, Trump economy, why no way? Under that, bullet points, rent freaks, cruise, healthcare, scare people feel squeezed, Dow equals abstract, paychecks equals concrete, voters say, good for them, not for me, and then boxed off in the center of the board, circled twice. The why grade harder than the dead, that, on the right side of the image. On the right side of the image, 100, on the right then. Dopsing bet Fred Farzamp. These weren't just hallway conversations. They were formalized, written down, and preserved as contemporaneous notes of senior staff trying to manage a president who wanted the A and couldn't understand why he kept getting a B-. Exhibit 21 is an email chain from October 2019 between a senior economic advisor and the communications director. The subject line, RE Econ Grades, Focus Group Takeaways. Time stamped 11:37 p.m. Let me read this word for word. Headline indicators are strong, but we continue to run into a grading ceiling. People acknowledge things are better, but when forced to choose a letter, they sit in the B-Selter-B EC band. Their personal finances, debt load, and long-term insecurity weigh down their grade. They're not grading the spreadsheet, they're grading their lives. In the reply, the communications director writes, "We cannot keep leading with best economy in American history if our own numbers show voters refusing to say A." Feels like we're arguing with their lived experience. That phrase, arguing with their lived experience, is highlighted in yellow. I'm not making accusations. I'm reading what's in the file. Now look at Exhibit 24. These are focus group transcripts from 3 states, Michigan, Florida, and Arizona, conducted in January 2020. Names are redacted, replaced with generic tags F38MI, M52FL. In the Michigan group, a moderator asks participants to give the Trump economy a letter grade. One woman says, "I'd say B-. My 401k is up, but nothing else feels different. My student loans are still there. Daycare still costs a fortune." Another participant jumps in, "I'd say C. Like, yeah, maybe the numbers are good, but it doesn't feel like an A economy to me." In Arizona, a retiree says, "I see the president on TV saying best ever, and I'm like, I don't know, man. My grandson can't afford rent." That's not an A. In Florida, a small business owner calls it, quote, "a B if you're rich, C+ if you're not." Over and over the same theme, Americans were tough graders on Trump's economy. Exhibit 27 is where the internal alarm really shows up. It's a memo labeled Urgent Economic Messaging Pivot, dated February 9, 2020, signed by the lead pollster. Page 1 starts with a blunt assessment. Despite continued macroeconomic strength, our grade question has flatlined. We are locked in at single-digit A's, high B's, and persistent C's. Attempts to drive the grade higher through messaging alone have not succeeded. The electorate's grading curve is anchored to personal cost of living and long-term financial anxiety, not to stock indices or top-line GDP. Then in bold, recommendation, discontinue letter grade question in public and internal tracking. Replace with more favorable framing, better off than 4 years ago, where responses track closer to our narrative. Read that again. When the grades didn't match the public message, the recommendation wasn't change policy. It was change the question. Not once, not twice. Repeatedly across these documents, you see the same instinct. If Americans insist on giving a B-, stop asking for grades at all. And then there's the deposition. Exhibit 33 is a transcript excerpt from the sworn testimony of the Northbridge Analytics founder, given under oath in the very case that pulled these documents into the light. The attorney asks about the president's reaction to the economic grade numbers. On page 47, line 12, the witness says, "He was very focused on the top-line message that this was the best economy yet. When we showed him the grade slides, he would often circle the A and B columns and cross out the C's and D's with his pen." The attorney asks, "Did he express concern about the lower grades?" The pollster answers, "He tended to dismiss them. He would say people are always negative, or they'll come around once we tell them how good it is." Later, on page 52, the attorney presses, "Did you communicate to the campaign that voters were, as you put it in one memo, hard graders?" The witness responds, "Yes." That exact phrase is in our March 2018 deck and in multiple follow-up communications. We stress that Americans were judging the economy through their own bills, not our graphs. Those words, multiple follow-up communications, show up across the file. Cross-reference memos, updated slide decks. Internal correspondence between policy staff and political staff. All telling the same story, the people at the top of the Trump operation were repeatedly told that voters were grading the economy cautiously, skeptically, sometimes harshly. And yet the public message became simpler, louder, more absolute, best economy ever. We even see this dynamic extend beyond the White House years. Exhibit 36 is a strategy document dated May 2022 as the team began preparing an economic message for another presidential run. The heading, Retrospective Perceptions of Trump Economy. One bullet point stands out. Voters remember volatility as much as growth. Word associations include roller coaster, chaotic, good then scary. They grade the period as B- overall, with sharper divides by party and income. In the margin, someone has handwritten, he still insists on A+ in speeches. That line is circled in blue ink. Next to it, another note, need to decide, do we tell him the truth on grades or not? All this is preserved in official records attached to a dry-sounding lawsuit about invoices and deliverables. It was never meant to be a public but once these files were released as evidence, even briefly, the internal picture became impossible to ignore. So what does all of this mean? This isn't about debating one statistic or another. This isn't about one poll or one document. This is about behavior. It's about a pattern of knowing in private that Americans were grading the Trump economy with caution, even skepticism, while insisting in public that the only acceptable answer was A+. You have to ask why. If this were anyone else, if any other president's own internal polling showed voters stuck at C+ and B-, while the leader demanded that staff repeat historic A+ on television, every commentator in the country would call that a disconnect. They would say he's out of touch. They would say he's not hearing what people are actually telling him. The files show something deeper than spin. They show a fundamental tension between two realities. On one side, macro indicators that looked strong on a chart. On the other, millions of Americans who saw the rent, healthcare, and debt rising and refused to hand out an A just because the Dow was up. One memo puts it bluntly. We are running an A economy argument in a C+ lived reality for too many voters. That line appears in Exhibit 29, and it sums up the whole story. When the top of the political operation chose to keep pushing the A narrative anyway, they weren't just making a messaging choice, they were making a moral choice to prioritize the story over the experience. And that choice has consequences. It shapes how people remember those years. It shapes how they listen when politicians now promise to bring back the Trump economy. Because according to these internal documents, a large share of Americans never believed it was an A in the first place. They graded tough. They graded based on their wallets, not on a ticker at the bottom of a cable screen. In the end, this trove of documents does not tell us whether any single data point was right or wrong. It tells us something more uncomfortable. The people running the show knew that voters were not buying the full best ever story, and they pushed it anyway. So where does that leave us? We now know that inside their own war rooms, Trump's team was looking at slide after slide, memo after memo, all pointing to the same conclusion. Americans are tough graders on the economy, even when the numbers on paper look good. We've seen the grade tables. We've seen the whiteboard photos with "why no A" scrawled across them. We've read the internal correspondence worrying that they were arguing with lip experience. We've heard the pollster under oath describe a president crossing out the C's and D's he didn't want to see. The long-term implication is simple, and it's bigger than one administration. You cannot spin people out of what they feel every month when the bills come due. You cannot talk them into calling it an A when they're living a B-. Not once, not twice. Repeatedly, the records show they tried, and repeatedly, Americans held their line. As this next political cycle unfolds, every candidate who talks about the economy, Trump included, will be graded by the same tough standard, not by slogans, not by superlatives, by how people actually live. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, share this, and stay alert. Don't let anyone tell you this doesn't matter, because it does.